It's want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, I think sure you can.
Okay, because it looks like a full agenda. Well, first of all, I would like to welcome everybody to the September 8th meeting of the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust Fund Committee meeting. Interesting agenda. I'm looking forward to this. I think what we need to do is, and you all probably already have used Zoom so much that you know what you're supposed to do, but we will have the IDEM media people go over the process. I think probably two of the most important things are keep your mic muted when you're not speaking, and use the little hand to be recognized to speak. But who with your media people are there?
Kevin Buck was going to provide just a brief overview of what participants.
Okay. Yes, thank you. All participants will be muted when they join the meeting, but participants will be able to address the board during the open forum portion of the meeting. We do ask that you identify yourself when speaking. Participants can only send chat messages to the host. For those joining us via Zoom, if you have a question or technical issue during the meeting, please use the raise hand or chat feature. To access the raise hand and chat feature, at the bottom of your or at the top of your screen, depending on your device, you'll see a menu bar. You may have to move your mouse or touch your screen for the menu bar to pop up. In the middle of that menu, there is a chat icon, which you can click on to show the chat dialog. You should see the raise hand option. Please utilize the raise hand option or chat features if you have any questions or comments, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. If any members of the media have joined us via Zoom, please utilize the chat feature or email media@idem.in.gov if you have any questions.
Okay, is that clear for everybody? Okay, the first real item on the agenda is a project implementation status report from IDEM. And interesting looking over that, there's been a lot has happened over the last couple of years.
Yep, it has been an exciting few years, has it not?
It has.
You want to go ahead and let's bounce a little bit there, Kevin. Okay. One more. So first, we're going to quickly touch on rounds 1 through 3 of our on-road and non-road projects. Generally speaking, these were the projects, the RFPs that we released in the spring of every year. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide and get some numbers out there. So we have had, in our first 3 rounds, we've received 125 applications for funding from this particular program. Of the 125, we have actually awarded 82 projects. And of those 82 awarded projects, at this point, we have 41 projects that are completed at this time. So roughly 50% of these projects are now complete. Generally speaking, when we award these, they're good for, our term for completion is usually somewhere between 18 to 24 months. So most all of these are tracking pretty well. Obviously, we've got some supply chain issues here and there to deal with, but generally speaking, I'm very satisfied with the progress we've had with most all of these projects. Some of the highlights from our on-road, non-road program for the first 3 rounds. And note that this is not all inclusive. Don't try to add all these numbers up and make sense out of them. For example, we have had 170 school buses through the program in the first 3 rounds. We have replaced 170 school buses, and I had sort of a thought this morning and my own research project that I wanted to pursue, because electric vehicles of varying types are becoming more and more popular, and people are wanting to know more and more about them. So I kind of was intrigued. So I went back and dug through my data a little bit more. So for example, Of those 170 school buses that we have replaced through the program so far, 11 of those were all electric school buses. And the great majority of those remaining were actually propane school buses. We might have literally done just a handful of clean diesel school buses in the early rounds. We've also done 22 transit buses across the state. 6 of those 22 transit buses are also all electric, with the remaining balance being CNG, compressed natural gas powered. We've done 10 municipal trucks so far this year, and we actually have one, I believe it was a round 3 award. A all-electric municipal truck was awarded earlier this year, so that'll be an interesting pilot project. It's not something that we've seen a lot of, but the lion's share of the remaining, again, were compressed natural gas or CNG trucks. To date, we have done 5 refuse haulers. Refuse haulers, as you all know, are some of the greatest bang for the buck projects. They're constantly operating, stop and start in the neighborhoods. They get old, they get maintenance issues. These are just fantastic air quality and quality of life projects. 2 of these are actually all electric refuse haulers, with all of the others being CNG. I'm really excited to see how these 2 actually work on the streets. I believe they're up in the Lafayette area. So once they're up and running, I look forward to going up there and kind of checking those out. I think those could be really cool to see. Locomotives, through the on-road, non-road program, we've done 1 locomotive project in which we replaced a switcher locomotive, a 50-year-old switcher locomotive with a brand new all-electric powered rail car mover. The emission reduction potential from that is huge. And then a variety of other projects, 39 other vehicles that we've improved or replaced, and a couple of highlights that I've noted here. And some of us who were here a little bit earlier talked a little bit about this. We have at the Indianapolis airport, we're going to have 8 ground support equipment vehicles, the tugs that move your luggage and move the planes. Those diesel are going to be replaced with all electric, and that should be coming relatively soon to completion. Those are really exciting. Not something a lot of other states have done. So something to be kind of excited and proud of. And then material handlers. We've also got a couple all electric material handlers out there as a result of our on-road and non-road programs. So a lot of cool projects. Next slide, please. And now we'll touch a little bit on the rounds 1 through 3, Diesel-Wise Indiana with Volkswagen DERA option projects. This was the program that the RFP was released typically in the fall of the last 3 years. And these are the projects that, if you'll recall, allow us to use the flexibility of the DERA program when we look at applications. A lot of the non-road category in the Volkswagen consent decree was very explicit and very focused on all electric alternatives. By allowing us to fund through the DERA option, that allows us to not only fund those all electrics, but also some other clean diesel as well as alternative fuel options. So in that count, we've had 18 applications so far. These are much higher budget, higher profile types of projects, so we shouldn't expect to see the same type of numbers. 11 of those 18 projects were awarded, and 9 of those 11 are now complete. Through rounds 1 and 2, we really just kind of made the awards early this year for round 3. So this is really more focused on round 2 of our completed projects. We replaced 8 excavators. One of them was actually a hybrid excavator, which is pretty cool. 8 non-road dump trucks. These are like the huge dump trucks you see rolling around the forts in the mining industry and such. Transitioning to clean diesel, but still really, really great projects. We've done 2 locomotives. In this case, we had 1 electric rail car mover like we had in the on-road, non-road, as well as a diesel option because the DERA option allowed for that. Bulldozers and landfill compactors. A couple of those are really, really significant pieces of equipment. Terminal trucks. Terminal trucks are becoming a really, really popular piece. Those are the ones that move the trailers primarily around in ports and warehouse locations. And all in, we are currently looking at a completion of 8 terminal truck projects. All of these are going from diesel to all electric projects. Really, really good emission reduction potential there. Let's see, we've got 3 front-end loaders that we have replaced and 1 material handler. And that material handler was also an electric material handler. So some really cool projects there through the DERA program also. All right, next slide, please. And then if you'll recall, we also, made the recommendation to the committee wholeheartedly approved the recommendation of allocating the full 15% that was allowable to us for EV infrastructure. And of that 6.15 million, we opted to dedicate 10% of that to level 2 charging and then 90% of that to DC fast charging. So we can run through the level 2 charging infrastructure update here. So what you see here, the map that you see on the right-hand side should look vaguely similar, but you might see some subtle differences. As far as the numbers go, we did receive 18 applications for 111 stations when we put this RFP out a couple of years ago. We did award 55 stations across 30 communities in the state of Indiana. And the difference that you'll see in this version versus the ones you may have seen in the past is you'll see 4 green dots. You didn't see green dots in the past because we didn't have completed projects at that point. So I'm happy to announce that the Goshen Public Library project is up and running. The city of Jasper, the city of Mishawaka, and the town of Highland. These 4 locations are up and running and charging vehicles right now at a level 2 rate. Really, really good community opportunities for those communities. All right, next slide. Touching quickly on our DC fast update. So the DC fast charging infrastructure, go ahead. Once again, the map should look vaguely familiar. One of the things that I think is important to note here is this map on the right-hand side is a constantly evolving map. A good example is from the time that this map was generated to the time of this meeting, we have had one of our IUG partners, our Indiana Utility Group partners, was not able to complete a site agreement with a location just outside of Indianapolis. And we had some conversation and ultimately chose to move that site to a different co-op up in the Fair Oaks area. So we've often looked at this map and said there's a bit of a gap really between Indianapolis and Northwest Indiana. Now you don't see on this map, there are Electrify America locations, DC fast spots in the Lafayette area. So there is charging there. However, what we now have is we've got a dot basically that will be a DC fast location roughly halfway between Lafayette and Northwest Indiana, which will be really, really cool because it gives us, you know, we're looking for that 50-mile gap being our maximum to the greatest extent possible, and moving that one location did it. We've had some other locations move along the way. So this map and these locations will be very fluid. However, we did, I think I've noted here roughly 85% of the site agreements are currently in place. So just to understand the logistics, the Indiana Utility Group is the partner that is actually responsible for identifying the ideal locations. They get approval from IDEM and then they work out their site agreements between the utility and the site hosts themselves. And about 85% of those are currently in place. And I sense based on the conversations that we had last month, and I think we're meeting again next week. Yeah. Next week, I think we'll probably be well over 90% will be in place here soon. Within a month, I think all of these site agreements will be in place. We'll be ready to roll. So in the end, what we're looking at are 61 stations that are going to serve as a great foundation for any and all DC fast programs that evolve from here. We're going to touch on NEVI here in a little bit. A lot of these locations that you see here are likely to be crossover with NEVI locations down the road. So, you know, we've got some really great opportunities here. The expectation, and I confirm this every month when we talk to our IUG partners, continues to be and comfortably that we will be done. We will have all 61 stations up and running by the end of 2023, and we will have some operational in the spring of next year. So many will recall, you got to pass the next slide. So many will recall whenever we talked a little bit about, well, are there any questions specific to what I have presented so far before we talk about the education outreach and marketing program?
I have a question, John. Will the location determine which utility serves that location? Will the utility that would normally serve that location be the utility that will serve the infrastructure?
Yes, it will be. And that's actually one of the beauties of this program that we put together with our IUG partners, with Drive Clean Indiana and IDEM. One of the things that I hear from many states around us are sort of a sense of jealousy that our Indiana utility groups are working so well together. They're helping each other out. A very good example, the site location that I referenced earlier, this was moving from just outside of Indianapolis up to Fair Oaks, is actually a scenario where a utility reached out to a completely separate utility outside of the IUG because they knew this was a really good area to take a look at for relocating this DC fast charger. So that will be the one that services that. That's where the utility, that's where the power will come from. So the IUG partnership, it seems to be growing outside of just those that we kind of recognize as IUG partners.
Are most of them, are the majority of the service providers REMCs?
No, I wouldn't say the majority of them are. The majority of them are some of our bigger players, but there are definitely some REMCs in there. As a matter of fact, the one that I'm referencing was associated with Wabash Valley, and now I think it is Jasper County.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's been a bit of a transition there, but the willingness to kind of share the wealth within this partnership has just been fantastic.
Well, good.
Any other questions? All right, hearing none. So most will recall that one of the things that we came to the committee with, it's been not quite a year ago, but we came to the committee with was a recommendation that we find someone that can really handle the education, the outreach, and the marketing components of a statewide EV infrastructure program. That is not what we do. It is not what we're necessarily good at, but we're getting much better at it. We solicited for statewide solicitation for that, and as you recall, in the end, the award was given to what at that point was called South Shore Clean Cities, is now Drive Clean Indiana, and Drive Clean Indiana is the state of Indiana's only Department of Energy recognized clean cities organization, which is actually a big deal and relevant because that gives them direct access to a lot of tools that we wouldn't otherwise have, that other organizations wouldn't otherwise have. It's a very handy feature to have. And we're going to let Ryan from Drive Clean Indiana kind of give you a little bit of update on the stuff that we have been doing. So with that, I'll just pass it to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Seals. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks for having us today. My name is Ryan Lissick, but I'm a program director over at Drive Clean Indiana. Just touching base on some of our accomplishments. We've been meeting on a monthly basis between the IUG and IDEM to develop the overall structure of this program that will help assist Hoosiers in electric vehicle adoption. We've been meeting with a variety of different public and private fleets, individuals, and EV stakeholders. During these meetings, we have identified hurdles that are delaying the transition to electrification. This data has been collected and will be used in the formatting of the key performance metrics that will ultimately foster the EV transition here in Indiana. As it relates to the environmental justice training, we have attended training with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that is focused on environmental justice endeavors and incorporation of disadvantaged communities as we are incorporating this program into the campaign strategy of inclusion of all demographics in high need areas across the state. We are working with the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, to conduct a statewide engagement for first responder training that is specific to Indiana and will be available online or in person. Additionally, there will be certifications that each first responder will be able to receive once the training is completed. We are looking into different opportunities for additional funding for infrastructure. We have been providing IUG and IDEM with upcoming grant opportunities and looking for opportunities to fill in geographic gaps in the current plan. This is just a great opportunity to build upon team initiatives. As it relates to the branding and logo development, we are very near in developing the logo and branding that is inclusive to the overall goals of this program and the campaign strategy that supplements the development of the DC fast charging deployment in partnership with the IUG. As it relates to the website development, we are very near completion with the logo and branding. As I said, we have met with website developers to host this website. That will be an asset for any Hoosier to be able to find the latest information for EVs. The website will be accessible from a multilingual speaking background, comply with ADA guidelines for accessibility of all users. The website will have a chat functionality for individuals that have specific questions. Additionally, this website will showcase federal incentives and local utility incentives, and then we'll have accessible links that go directly right back to the utility's website. Within the website, we'll have basic EV 101 concepts to help individuals through the adoption of EVs into their own lives. We'll have an EV calculator. It's an online widget for parties to help analyze the cost comparisons associated with EV adoption. We will be developing a certified dealer list. This will be in a map that allows interested parties to be dealers that sell electric vehicles and have completed certification through our design program. There will also be an electric charging station map that allows users to input specific locations to view the different charging infrastructure located in selected area and corridors. We'll also be having a home charging station and electrician availability feature. This will allow for individuals to have access to higher power charging stations at their home, and local electrician experience in EV SC installs that will receive their home training. We'll also have an events page that identifies the local EV happenings in the EV industry of the state of Indiana. We'll have an EV selection page that supplies users with information that's structured around the types of EVs that are available from specific preferences, how to charge at home, what scenarios, questions need to be thought of when purchasing an electric vehicle. We'll also create a line of videos that will be showcasing Hoosiers in Indiana and their use of EVs. We're also developing how-to and basic fundamentals of EV implementation as well. And as we relates to outreach and engagement, we're assisting with planning multiple events into the end of this year and next year, as we look at partnering different state events planned over the coming years. Getting back to the dealer engagement and certification, we have dealer networks and training to help in the ease of deploying EVs at the local dealership level and associated certifications. We'll be hosting a variety of education events and ride and drive events for individuals to view a variety of EVs that are available ongoing events. We look to incorporate other funding as we look into bolstering the current EV and related initiatives. As a group, we're poised to apply for additional funding for future infrastructure and EV deployment. Recently, we had 8 concept papers that were submitted to the U.S. Department of Energy for infrastructure deployment. All of these will be anticipated hearing something from the U.S. Department of Energy if these concepts are asked to proceed to full applications. The applications are due in November 2022. Next. Is there any questions?
All right, well, before we get to questions, I wanted to thank you, Ryan. And for those who weren't able to hear Ryan very well, we apologize. I think they released the conference room next to us for a speed dating round or something because it got really loud and really fast. We're going to see if we can do something about that. But if there's anything that you didn't quite catch from Ryan, feel free to ask those questions.
As it relates to branding and logo development, I appreciate the work you guys have done to date. Have you gotten in touch with the Indiana Destination Development Corporation?
As it relates to the branding and logo, no.
So it's a new kind of quasi agency underneath the Lieutenant Governor. And they've been doing a lot of branding and logo development for, in Indiana. Basically, you put your little saying and then in Indiana, you can make it however you want. So as you guys continue to work through that, might be a good resource for you guys. To continue working through the whatever you have left.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Nice presentation, Ryan, and I'm here with the Commissioner offices. The 8 concept papers, are those available for folks to look at?
As of right now, there's confidential information and we can't share those as of right now, but when they go to application and to the project implementation, we'll be able to share some of the different details.
So I can appreciate that. Of the 8, are they kind of equally distributed around the state?
For the most part, yes, they're mostly focused in northern Indiana, central Indiana, and southern Indiana, along the corridors, and they're mostly focused for EV, heavy duty, medium duty, and the infrastructure associated with this.
Okay, and when do you expect to hear back from DOE as to whether or not your concept paper gets selected for moving forward with making an application?
Sometime later this month or early,
Is DOE running on time?
they pushed back the due date, so I accept sometime in October.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Ryan? All right, hearing none, thanks, Ryan. Thank you. All right, Kevin, you want to give us a bump inside there? There. You can go ahead and hit the next one if you want to. So I'm going to pass it off to Scott here to give us a quick NEVI update. Kind of as we talked about earlier, I touched on earlier, a lot of the work that we're doing right here. These 61 stations are going to serve as a foundation for the NEVI program to grow from, as well as several other programs to potentially grow from down the road. And there's a lot of overlap in the work that we're doing, that they're doing. So it seems quite logical to kind of get a feel for what's going on with the NEVI program. So with that, Scott, would you bring us up to speed?
Sure. Well, want to thank the committee for an opportunity to provide a brief update. As Sean mentioned, there is a tremendous amount of overlap and I think opportunity for synergy among the 2 programs. So excited to share what we've done to this point and where we're going with you all. So the bipartisan infrastructure law created the NEVI program. And in early 2022, we received federal guidance to all of the state DOTs, the requirement for each state to build out an EV infrastructure deployment plan in order to be able to access the formula funding that had been set aside within the law for EV charging infrastructure. So NDOT, multi-agency team that includes public and private stakeholders, set about building out that plan. We did a significant amount of public engagement over the spring and summer to marry together our data-driven approach, which relied heavily on mapping our current and planned EV infrastructure to determine how close we were to meeting those requirements to build out our alternative fuel corridors and where there were needs and opportunities to target NEVI investment to help further us towards achieving those goals. We also were able to leverage some data from Purdue University and their research team in the School of Civil Engineering to understand how electric vehicles are using our alternative fuel corridor network today. So we have some data and insights on which of our interchanges across the highway network are most frequently utilized by EV vehicles, and where those dwell sessions are most common, average length of those 12 session times. So we were excited to be able to have that data at our disposal. It was something that was unique that we were able to leverage as part of our plan that not every state could. So you know, one side of our approach is very much data driven, but then we also leveraged a lot of public input to understand how we could structure the program in ways to really maximize access to the infrastructure and help with the community needs and goals that exist across the state as well. A few of the key requirements there, I won't go through those in great detail, but just to kind of further Sean's point, much of the baseline requirements of the NEVI program speak to a lot of the goals and intent that are being addressed through the charging program approved by the VW committee to provide sort of that network coverage, if you will, along the highway system and place those in proximity, charging stations in proximity to each other and proximity to interchanges and intersections. That really maximize the convenience and maximize utilization as adoption grows over time. So we can jump to the next slide. So this is a high level map to sort of give you a flavor of our mapping analysis and preliminary recommendations for charging station locations. Again, this is based on an analysis of the current and planned EV charging infrastructure, including the 61 stations planned through the VW program, and also through that connected EV vehicle data that we have through partnership with Purdue. So through all of that data being married together, we were able to put together 44 preliminary site locations that achieve those goals of building out our existing AFC corridors with stations no more than 50 miles apart and within a mile of an interchange or intersection. You can see here we're fortunate in the way that our AFCs were selected and the way our highway network is laid out, and we've got very robust coverage and robust access to this infrastructure across the state once it's fully built out. And I will mention these 44 preliminary sites are sort of our minimum to meet those baseline build out requirements. But we have identified an additional 28 what we're calling alternative locations that could be built out. One, if the funding allows us to do so, but also to provide some additional flexibility should any of these preliminary locations not work out for whatever reason, lack of available power or not having a site host that's willing to come on board at a given location. We do have those 28 or so other alternative sites that could be leveraged as well. Skip ahead. So this just again gives you a little more context of with that preliminary 44 station build out, the level of coverage across the state that we'll be able to achieve. What's particularly exciting is, you know, we'll be at virtually 100% of all Indiana residents being within 35 miles of an DC fast charge location, just among these 44 sites that we've identified. So when you layer in some of the build outs that are happening in parallel, that percentage, you know, moves even closer to 100%. Skip ahead. As far as timeline, our overall project is sort of I would say a year or more behind the progress that has happened to this point with the VW program. As I mentioned, our plan, federally required plan, was submitted to the Federal Joint Program Office for review at the end of July, and we are expecting to have approval of the plan back by the end of this month. The next step forward for NDOT would be to then advertise for a request for proposals for a program manager to partner with NDOT to oversee this program over the life of the funding. That program manager, one of their initial tasks will be to build out our procurement and contracting framework and our guidelines and requirements for the program over, I would say, the first few months of the first quarter of next year, with the intent being able to issue RFPs for those initial site deployments by mid next year. And just a couple of other sort of federal guidelines that drive the program. This is an 80-20 match, which is pretty traditional for federal highway funded projects. The 20% match in this case, sort of a unique distinction here is that there is the opportunity for the private sector to participate in that 20% match. And as we've structured the program to this point, we have communicated the expectation to interested partners that there will be an expectation for them to come forward to fund that local match requirement. The federal program does provide funds not only for installation and construction, but also for at least 5 years of operation and maintenance. And then finally, just wanted to point out that this will very much be a public-private partnership approach. NDOT as the state agency, kind of similar to comments that Sean shared earlier. We look at our core competencies, and as a DOT, we don't see owning and operating a charging network as a core competency, but want to make sure that we can leverage the private partners in the state that have that expertise and that knowledge and that bandwidth. So NDOT will be providing program management and program administration, but we'll be working closely with private partners and with utilities and a whole ecosystem for making sure that we're delivering the deployments and that we're meeting our expectations for reliability and operations. So I think that's our last slide. So we'll be happy to answer any questions.
I do have one question. Tesla has their own charging stations. So in your planning, are you just ignoring those? Will Tesla be able to use the new long charging stations that states would put up? How are you dealing? How is that particular issue going to be dealt with?
Sure. So that's a great question. And I can say that in our mapping analysis and our inventory of the existing charging infrastructure, we did account for the Tesla stations that are deployed in the state. There has been some ongoing discussion with Tesla potentially opening their network up to non-Tesla EV owners. So we did want to be mindful of where those locations were and have that as a consideration for planning for our network. With respect to utilization by Tesla drivers, there are adapters available to allow for Tesla's proprietary port, their proprietary plug, to be converted to a CCS plug to be used in an interoperable charging station like those that are deployed by a lot of the national charging network providers. So they would, Tesla drivers would have the ability to utilize these stations. The Tesla stations, as I mentioned, we've accounted for those in our planning. It remains to be seen kind of whether and at what extent Tesla would potentially move forward with making their stations open to the public. But it is something that we sort of built into our formula as we looked at laying out the needs across the state.
Okay, and another thing, and you talked about the 20% match, but is there any thought that the VW money that's been spent would be contribute to the match, because that money is not state money. It was VW money that was given to us through a court order.
Right, so the Joint Program Office has advised the states that VW settlement funds would be eligible to serve as the match. There was some confusion about that early on, but we've got clarification there. So that would be available as an option. And one of the, I guess, sort of safeguards that we've tried to take into account in our planning process is we've worked really closely with the item team, with the Indiana Utility Group to determine where there are overlaps of potential site locations where we may be able to leverage the VW funding and the investments being made by the utility group as a match. For example, if there's a particular site that meets the NEVI requirements, but maybe the plan at this point is for 2 charging ports versus that minimum that NEVI requires of 4 ports. You know, perhaps we can invest NEVI funding to add those 2 additional ports. So we're certainly mindful of that, as there are opportunities to make the funding from both programs go a little bit further, if you will.
Okay, and one more question, and it's really a kind of a what if question. But when this is pretty well built out, and we're going to see a lot more electric vehicles on the road, and in future years, if and we know that sometime in the winter, some winters, we're going to have some major snowstorms. Cars are stranded on interstates and major highways. To stay warm, they run the cars. The electric charging vehicles may be out of fuel before some of the gas powered vehicles. How are emergency services going to deal with these disabled cars once they're able to perhaps get to a charging station, but they have no ability to do it on their own?
So I think that there isn't really a mechanism within the NEVI program specifically to address that concern. I know there is starting to be infrastructure built up to support EV owners from a roadside assistance standpoint, providing mobile charging, and I think as you forecast out, there's anticipation that there may be able to be options for battery swap out for drivers that are stranded and that don't have access, or they're not close to a fast charger. I think one of the things that we have considered through the NEVI planning process, though, that may be valuable in a response scenario like that is we have talked with the law enforcement community, and this is an area where Senator Kreider has expressed some interest and has asked us to look deeper into this issue as being able to provide sort of an ability for law enforcement vehicles to sort of get first preference at one of these charging stations, because we know as police departments, fire departments, EMS, as they transition more toward utilizing electric vehicles in their fleets, they need to be able to have access to convenient, reliable charging infrastructure as they're servicing the community and going on runs, what have you. So one of the things we're looking at is being able to have some sort of a reservation system, or be able to provide a preemption for those law enforcement vehicles that are operating EVs to be able to plug in when they need to, so that we're not having breakdowns in service or instances where someone is stranded or needs public safety support, and those first responders aren't able to get there because they're not able to charge their vehicle.
Well, I'm glad that he's doing that. He's my senator. But I just think that not only Indiana, but all states' emergency services need to be giving some thought to how they're going to deal with this, because eventually it's going to happen someday. And I'd hate for it to happen without any planning how to deal with it.
And Chair Guard, I would go ahead and just add that is actually a very specific example of why we brought the folks from Drive Clean Indiana on board. Because the Department of Energy, National Renewable Energy Lab, these folks provide a ton of training opportunities to our first responders on how to deal with these kind of events. Not from the standpoint of operating the vehicles themselves, but how to deal with the vehicles when they're stranded, how to deal with the vehicles in different emergency scenarios.
Mhm.
And so it's great to have them here to be able to help provide that input and insight to the overall program.
Well, good. I'm glad people are thinking about it.
Yeah, there are a lot of smart people doing a lot of smart things out there. And I just wanted to tag on to one thing Scott did say. So the Indian Utility Group that we meet with every month, we get updates, we chat about various things. One of the things that we did talk about as NEVI became more and more prevalent was many, if not most, of the members of the Indian Utility Group that are working within the Volkswagen program are actually doing a lot of pre-build work to prepare for NEVI. Meaning they're laying larger conduit. They're basically preparing a site as they prepare it for our two connectors. They're laying the groundwork to future-proof it so that if it is a viable NEVI site, that it is ready to roll pretty much day one, and they don't have to restart anything to get there. So again, they're being very proactive in that as well.
Okay.
Scott, I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
So, I noticed, the allotment, Indiana guys, it's huge, 99 million. That's really awesome. So with the Volkswagen Trust, we funded what, 61 stations. Or 2 stations each, so 122 chargers, something like that, for 15. Is all of that 90 going to be used for the 44, or are there future things that it's going to be used for? And I know we leveraged a lot of money from the utility group. Probably resembles a little bit of the 20% match, but how's that going to work? Because it seems like we could make a huge impact with $99 million.
Yeah, so the 44 preliminary sites are sort of the minimum to meet our threshold to build out the AFCs. We have identified up to 72, so we would be able to potentially do further build outs. There is the 5-year operation and maintenance commitment that factors into the cost beyond just the initial site build out. There will be some program administration fee, obviously, over the life of the program, but yeah, we're confident with the 100 million that's been distributed to or allotted for Indiana that we can, we very much see that initial 44 as sort of a minimum, and based on our inflationary impacts and supply chain impacts, we're hopeful that we can make those dollars go further. And I think where we have synergies with the VW program, again, that allows, I think, both programs to be able to stretch those dollars to the maximum.
It was when Senator Gardner was asking some questions, I didn't realize we do too. Yours has a fuller, so that's part of that cost, but
Right.
That's I wish we would have got $99 million for VW. That would have been awesome.
That would have been a significant Dieselgate scandal.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it is, and Brian, that's a really good point, because one of the things is, as I say, these folks are preparing for NEVI build out. But we're basically installing a single station, a box with 2 connectors on the box. What the NEVI program requirements are basically 2 stations, 4 connectors. So they're rolling out significantly more when it comes to the actual hardware. We did build a 5-year O&M into our program too, which just made all the sense in the world, because that was the biggest complaint people were expressing was, well, what happens when it's broken? So, you just build it into the system, right? And then somebody else has to be accountable for it. And the people that know what they're doing are the ones. So Yeah, I mean, the 100 million can go a long way, but it's also significantly larger scale than what we threw out there in our 61.
Yeah, then I would, like you said, obviously encourage you as most possible. You know, work with IUG to make that money go further. Work's on, half the work's done already.
Yeah, we negotiated a pretty competitive price. Actually, we didn't negotiate, they offered a very, very fair deal.
Thank you, Scott.
I just would offer that I can remember in the early days of this advisory group, members expressing concern about coordination going forward and not dismissing what the VW trust dollars accomplished. And so it's very encouraging to hear your presentation, because I made a bunch of questions when I reviewed this the other day. And Senator Regard, of course, being the whiz kid that she is, she asked most of the questions I had put down. So it's nice to know that I was not on the wrong track when I was thinking this. So the only question that I have that hasn't been asked already is, how is NDOT going to partner with the outreach and education and the website, et cetera, that Drive Clean is proposing under the VW outreach? I mean, it sounds like if I were a owner of an electric vehicle, I don't want to have to go to 2 different websites to get information. So are you going to piggyback, or is it too early to ask that question, but just put it out there as a concern?
Yeah, that's definitely been a consideration really from the outset of our planning, and the federal requirements, I will say, I think account for that as well. So the data reporting and data connectivity is a pretty significant component of the program. In the most recent program, minimum program standards that are out for public comment right now, the expectation is that we'll be required to report quarterly at least on not only utilization, but site locations and status, whether they're up or down for maintenance. So I think there would be potential for us to provide that data to the site that Drive Clean's building. And I think the intention is to make as much of that data open source as possible. So not only could we feed into the Drive Clean website, we could also feed into the Department of Energy's alternative fuel database. We could feed into applications like PlugShare and others that the EV owners rely on to find stations and find those that are either online or down. So absolutely, there will be, for our folks that are serving as our prime site vendors, being able to demonstrate that ability to provide the data connectivity and the data sharing and reporting. That would be a built-in requirement.
And then my last is the Northwest Indiana Forum oversaw a 7-county strategic plan that we reference as Ignite the Region. And it has 5 pillars. Infrastructure is one of them. My staff support that. And alternative fuels is certainly one of the components within that plan of action. And so we have our annual meeting coming up at the end of this month, and we'll have a rolling PowerPoint going on. The 2 maps that are in today's presentation today, the item map and the NDOT map, are those pictures that I can get from someone, send them to me so that we can have it included in that PowerPoint rolling. And okay, Sean's shaking his head yes, so Sean's
Well,
always good.
I'm shaking my head yes, only for the items.
Okay, can you shake his head?
Scott
yes?
can shake his head there.
Yes, yeah, we can provide.
I gave you my business card, so you can send it to me.
Yeah, so, and I should mention, for anyone that's interested, our NEVI plan is publicly available on the NDOT website, so you can review that. We also have an appendix that provides site-by-site mapping if you want to zoom in and need, or would like a little bit more detail. But any of the maps that we shared today, as well as some others we have that sort of break out some other analysis, would be happy to provide that.
And given all the grants that we're dealing with at the federal level from the various federal agencies, it's nice to hear that they made a decision that you can utilize the VW investments as the 20% match and not put everybody at a disadvantage of not being able to use those dollars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just curious, is there a revenue template for these? Is there a model an operator pops in and becomes generate revenue from this, or is this just sort of a publicly funded and goodwill venture?
So I think we have viewed the NEVI funding very much as a seed investment to address kind of the larger barrier to adoption of range anxiety. So the goals that were kind of spelled out by the federal administration when the program was announced, I think their goal was to have at least 500,000 DC fast chargers by 2030, with a priority being given to the interstate network. So, you know, the example that I've used for folks is if you're making that trip from Michigan to Florida with an EV, you do that today, you sort of have to have a pretty well thought out flight plan based on the availability of charging infrastructure today. I think the NEVI program, the intent seems to be to make that a little more convenient. So in terms of revenue, though, I think it's very much the chicken and the egg conversation of at what point does adoption and utilization reach a point where there's revenue potential here, because you know, adoption, not only is adoption nascent, but there's also, you have to factor in that about 80% of charging will happen at home. Of that remaining 20%, about 10% is estimated to be at work. So of the overall charging that's happening, a pretty small portion is anticipated to be at the DC fast chargers. And I think our conversations that we've had with the utility group and others indicate that you know, the conversation right now is less about revenue generation and more about how do we get to a break even.
No one's putting these out there and making money. You're putting these next to your business that's making money, or you're putting it in a place that
The business case is to draw them in to spend money elsewhere, not to make money in that.
Right. One of the things that we really liked about South Shore's proposal for the charging infrastructure was the education outreach component of their proposal. And part of the reason is that we know that 61 fast chargers right now, there isn't demand for these to stand on their own. Our hope is that by the time that we reach year 5 into the program, that we have increased demand to the point where they could stand on their own. That's why Drive Clean is not just focusing on, you know, where the stations are and that they're available for your use, but it's also to educate the public that electric vehicles are becoming a more viable option, increase the percentage in the fleet so that our investments are going to pay off going forward, not just after the programs.
I do have one more question. Is there a need to address anything in the upcoming legislative session related to the NEVI plan implementation? And I know that's a dangerous question to ask an agency person, I'm sorry, but
I should qualify by saying we don't have finalized federal guidance yet. So we're working with a little bit of a moving target on that side. With that said, though, we've had multiple briefings with Chairman Soliday and with Chairman Cook, and they've both indicated the willingness to work with us on anything that may be needed from a legislative standpoint. But at this point, I think what was addressed in the most recent session, particularly with House Bill 1221, I think has removed any hurdles that we see at this point.
perfect, thank you. I'll stop now, start something else.
All right. Anybody else? Yes, good. All right. Well, thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Let's go ahead and bounce. All right. So this is so far today, it's all been about information gathering and data sharing. And this is our first set of slides that is going to ask you to consider what we are proposing. So let's go ahead and get that next one. So one of the things, and for those who were here earlier, you heard me refer to this as my labor of love over the last month, was trying to get a legitimate sense for what our current obligations in each one of our categories is, as it compares to the total $41 million that we had. So what you have in front of you are the different project categories. And if you'll remember way back when we started this, we decided to kind of simplify these 10 down into just 5. That being on-road equipment and vehicles, non-road equipment and vehicles, DERA option, the EV infrastructure portion, and then program administration. So there were 10 EMAs within the consent decree. We kind of grouped some of these together to make life a little easier. So if you'll recall, in our beneficiary mitigation plan that we submitted way back when, we obligated 21.32 million to the on-road equipment and vehicle category. To date, through all rounds and all funding agreements currently executed, we have obligated a little over 22.3 million in funding to that category. So we actually overspent that particular category by a little over $1 million. That is in no way an issue or a problem. In the grand scheme of things, as you can see, it's missing the target, quote target, by 5% less than. Because what we do have is we have an excess in our next category of non-road equipment and vehicles. In our BMP, we set aside $8.2 million for that. Currently, we have about 3.8 million obligated against that particular category, which leaves us at about 4.4 within that category still remaining. DERA option, this is the one that I, when we first started this, said is probably going to be the most attractive option to many folks in the non-road sector, because it still provides the flexibility that the DERA program has, but also gives them the option to explore electric vehicles and equipment, because electric vehicles and equipment in the non-road sector were 3 years ago really a new concept. They have become less of a new concept over the last 3 years, as you heard me talk about earlier. But this one has been tracking right along with what we said. The guess was, I think 4.1 is a fair figure here. We've spent almost 4.1 on that particular EMA. EV infrastructure, this one, we've capped this one out. We're not going to do anything else here other than note, we will have about 131,000 still on the table, so to speak, after all of these are obligated. There are a variety of ways that we can go about this right now. What we kind of have on the back burner is we're going to hold on to that 131, try to find ourselves one more good DC fast location, and offer that up as the Volkswagen contribution towards the project, and let whoever the other partner might be pick up the difference. And we believe that we probably would be able to work with any utility group to find another location once we kind of identify where there's a good gap to consider it. And then program administration, you'll see here we set aside 1.165, 800,000 over 5 years to Drive Clean Indiana to do the work that they're doing for us and on our behalf of the statewide program. Leaves us a balance of about 366,000. So when we look at our totals, I think the key thing to look for here is going to be the remaining balance of category, second to the last column. The total remaining balance is roughly 3.9 million, but if we factor out administration and we really just focus on that project-oriented funding that we had identified early on, we were sitting at about 3.57 million. Still out there, of which, as you can see, 4.4 million of that is in that non-road equipment and vehicles, and then you've got the overspend on the on-road equipment. Those all net out at the end, leaving us with about 3.57. Go ahead and bounce to the next slide. One of the other things that we really wanted to take a look at was what is the geographic and financial breakdown of the projects that we have awarded to date on the diesel side. These do not include anything EV related. These are only diesel related projects, just to be clear. And there are 152,000 different ways you can break up the state of Indiana geographically. We opted for north, central, south. I'm not entirely sure who I borrowed this map from, but I appreciate them giving us a nice crisp map with very clear lines at the county level. when we took a look at this and I started working through the data, what we found was 59 of our projects, we had roughly 100 projects total so far in that realm. So, 98 is close enough. We'll use round numbers. So 60% of our projects have been in the northern portion of the state. The lion's share of that 60% is probably in our far northern counties, including Lake, Porter, LaPorte, St. Joe, Elkhart, and in large part because air quality kind of demands it. Our scoring criteria, as you'll recall, did factor in the ambient air quality of the areas, the various sensitivities of the areas. So, the scoring criteria does tend to lean us north, just kind of by default. Central Indiana, we had a pretty good group from Central Indiana. Roughly 34% of our funds have been, or projects have been dedicated to Central Indiana. And then you'll see kind of the small number of 6% in Southern Indiana. And on the far right-hand side, you'll see percent of the funds spent pretty much the same. So we don't need to necessarily go down the percentage of funds spent, but I think an important thing to note here, and I've said this before, is we cannot fund a project from which we do not get an application. So this is also somewhat a statistical representation of the type of applications for funding that we are getting. The majority of them coming from north, a significant number from central, and not too many from the southern region of the state. So this is kind of the background for the next slide and our deeper conversation. So the round 4 considerations prior to making our recommendation for your consideration are the following, and this is sort of a summary of the previous 2 slides. So on-road equipment and vehicles have already been overspent by roughly $1 million. Our non-road equipment and vehicles have actually been underfunded by nearly $3.8 million. The DERA option program demand seems to be right on target with whatever we put out there. It's consistently spent to that level. EV infrastructure is already funded at the maximum. We really can't do anything with that. Program administration funds can be requested at any time. I think it's important to note that even if we close out all of the other books, we still have that 10-year window to spend down program administration. We also have the flexibility to move those funds around a little bit to, maybe fund. If we find that we're $50,000 short on a project, there's nothing that says we cannot pull from that without having to revisit the BMP. As we've talked about before, greatest emission reduction potential exists in our non-road equipment and vehicles. And, it's clear and it's obvious that applications received and the projects that we funded in Southern Indiana have been lagging the other regions of the state. So with that, we're going to bounce to the next slide. So here is the recommendation we are making, some rationale to support it, and how we strategically intend to try to make this happen. So the recommendation is to obtain the greatest emission reduction potential possible. We would focus round 4 on non-road projects across Indiana with a special investment in marketing and outreach for Southern Indiana participation with a total funding of about $3.5 million. That's that after administration costs figured. The rationale for why we think that is a solid approach. Non-road projects at construction sites, port locations, rail yards, other locations where heavy-duty equipment operates has a very significant localized impact on air quality and the quality of life for those living there compared to on-road applications. Over the first 3 rounds of our non-road projects, there's been an increase in diesel to electric replacements. I think I touched on that earlier, which are eligible under the Volkswagen consent decree. But those, while those that are focused on non-electric replacements can be eligible and are eligible under the DERA option. And I'll speak a little bit to the strategy of what that means after I kind of talk on or touch on the strategy itself. So as I said, using our marketing and outreach partners, we intend to put a special focus on connecting with Southern Indiana non-road programs And we will utilize our discretion in identifying high-quality projects beyond scoring. So you know that we have talked about in the past when we have made recommendations, sometimes there's a line and we have moved things maybe up and down. Just kind of using our own discretion that this is a different project. There's something special about this project that warrants us giving it consideration beyond just the score that it received. So we would do that again with the focus on trying to pull in more quality projects from Southern Indiana. Now, the second bullet of rationale is confusing to those who don't do this on a daily basis, but the point that I'm making with electric being eligible for funding under Volkswagen and electric and everything else being eligible for funding under the DERA option is the intent is to put this RFP out there without specific language that says this is how we're funding your project. So what I would ultimately do, or what we as the team at IDEM would do, would be we would use the Volkswagen, that category 2, where we have the $3.8 million, that those funds allow for a higher match on all electric programs than the others do, 75% versus 45%. That's a significant difference. We're talking about the non-road sector. We're talking about typically millions of dollars for quality projects. So what we would do is we would select Volkswagen funding, so to speak, for those projects that are all electric projects. So they're receiving the highest funding amount available. And we would kind of reserve the DERA option as the funding mechanism, if you will, for those that are non-electric. But instead of putting it out there in like 2 RFPs, we believe it's something that we can do and put out there as a single RFP, and then we can just do the administrative, backroom maneuvering of how this project gets funded versus this one, as far as the categories go. It's okay, you're smiling. What is your question?
It's a compliment, actually.
I appreciate compliments. I don't get them all that often, so thank you.
I mean, it's just, at the beginning of this process, I think I probably went on record more than once, making certain that the areas of concern with regards to air quality were perhaps the most recipients of the project recipient of dollars. And so it pleases me to see that the northern section got the 69 projects, and yes, it's very valuable to us and very well appreciated. So going forward, I will not object to focusing on outside of the state, and I'm pleased to see that you were able to do this breakdown and making this recommendation. So that's what it is.
There's something else that's worth pointing out about the split with regard to how the South has shook out is that when we get outside of Lake and Porter County, Clark and Floyd, our portion of Louisville would be the second most air quality sensitive area. And we haven't had applications coming out of that area. So it's not just looking at, an area where there aren't air quality concerns. There are genuine air quality concerns in Southern Indiana too. It's just that we have not been successful in getting applications.
Right, and there are lessons that, and one of the things in the non-road sector in particular, an all-electric material handler is not a propane school bus, right? There are vastly different technologies. And so what we're now starting to see, what we believe we're starting to see, and in large part, a lot of it is happening in or around ports, and that is folks have been paying attention to what's going on in the port at Burns Harbor, and they're saying, okay, we're seeing these projects and they're working. So we may start seeing project, now we're more comfortable with it. Somebody else has done this. Somebody else has done the guinea pig, right? So we're seeing sort of a growing level of comfort with reaching out to peers and saying, so this did work for you, right? I thought it was, pure fantasy, but as it turns out, it's a fantastic approach. Let's do that too. And I think that will be one of the sort of the connecting strategies that we'll have is to make sure, in particular, our port partners in Southwest and South Central reach out to our port partners in Northwest Indiana to talk about the things that have been done and how those can be applicable to them as well.
since the start, we've had a huge focus on school buses, electric and otherwise. There's a lot of money out there for school buses now, and it doesn't make sense for us to focus any further investments on that side. But the non-road sector is a sector where we've gotten increased interest from in recent solicitations too. So this gives us an opportunity to balance out where we're at with our BNP original plan, as well as maximize the cost benefit of the remaining $3.5 million.
Two questions. Could you maybe talk a little bit more? So would you have any concern? The funding hasn't been spent in this category, non-road, as much as the others. How confident are you that we'll get the projects to do that? And then talk a little bit more about that match percentage, how you see that working if there are only a few projects versus if there are.
Sure. So to answer the first question first, yes. Not only, as Scott said, we've seen more and more demand kind of on the non-road side. We're also seeing more and more comfort on higher profile, higher cost sort of projects, which will typically be our all electric options. So I'm not at all concerned that we'll have in excess of 3 million in 3.5 in ask. I'm not comfortable with that. And then the funding strategy, and I think the easiest way to look at it is we're putting $3.5 million in a single bucket. We have within the consent decree and the DERA option, which is also a component of the consent decree. So within those two components, we have the flexibility to fund anywhere, and I'm just talking electric because it's the straightforward. If it's an electric project, we have the capability to fund it up to 75%. But if we were only focused on that non-road sector using the Volkswagen consent decree language, we wouldn't be able to do clean diesel rail car movers, which are also a huge emission reduction project. But the DERA option allows us to do that. So what we intend to do is when we get all of these applications, we are going to strategically select, and this is, that backroom stuff that will need to happen, more administrative, is we can strategically select the projects that are best suited for funding from Volkswagen, 75%, and the ones that are best suited for funding from DERA, non-electric. And if we have, and this would be a great problem to have, I don't know if we'll get there, but if we had a scenario where we have so many all electric projects that if we end up with $7 million worth of ask on only all electric projects, then, we would, once again, we would use our scoring criteria to see how things shake out. And it could be that we come to you all with a recommendation that we're just going to spend all of it up here in the all electric side, because we can move that 37 grand from DERA option, so to speak, in theory, up to the consent decree scenario, or to fund at 75.
And I guess what I was getting at is it your intent that applicants will send in what are the project total without a proposed match, or a proposed match that you then discuss?
I hear what you're saying, and the expectation is that they're going to submit, what we will be including is in the RFP is the maximum allowable amount that the program would pay. So if you're doing electric, it's going to be up to 75%. And as I said, in that scenario, if we overspend that category, then those 1 or 2 projects that are kind of at the bottom of the scale, I would just get on the phone and say, hey, so here's the deal. Our ask was really big, would you do this for 45? If not,
So
that's
they will
cool.
be
I'll just
putting in
do
a
that.
request, a specific a match, and then
And their ask
you'll
is
work it out
the
based
max.
on how many applications.
Right. The project type is the only thing that's going to dictate what the match has to be.
Yeah.
So within the solicitation or the RFP, we can stipulate based on the project type what you would be eligible to receive. And really, it's only with electric to electric or replacing diesel with electric, where you can get up to 75. Everything else would fall under the DERA option.
I guess
Right,
I
yeah,
just-
it's primarily fuel source, if you will, that drives the number.
Yeah, I was thinking more of if someone doesn't know where they are gonna fall, where they're gonna be funded, it's gonna be,
They're not.
can you
that-
even
Yeah.
do the project?
Yeah, that's our problem, not theirs. They're gonna shoot the maximum allowable. And that's what we want them to do, because the goal is to fund as many projects as a high level as we can, because the reason that folks are not going to apply for funding, if you're only offering, and we saw this with other states who were a little bit cheaper in what they were offering. You know, school buses being a good example. The reason our ask on school buses has always been so huge is that we're offering a lot more than some states. Some states are like, we'll give you up to 25 grand for a school bus. They're just like, yeah, I can get that elsewhere. So,
Leveraging factors into the scoring. Sure.
yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chair Guard? She's still with us.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, did you have any questions?
I'm sorry, I had put it on mute because I
No
had
worries.
had a dog problem.
They do that, don't they?
So at this point, I guess we move on to item number 7, 2022 in perspective.
Well, actually, we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
So we made a recommendation, and we just need you to, you know, it sounds like we've had good conversation. We just need you to formally approve that recommendation, if that is your will, and then we'll move on.
Well, I appreciate the obvious time and thought that you have put into this. It's very obvious that you worked hard on it, and I think we definitely need to make a concerted effort to get more applications from Southern Indiana, and I still don't quite understand why we haven't gotten them. I don't know if they get more Louisville news than they do Indiana news, what the problem is, but anyway, it's going to take some effort, but I appreciate the thought you put into this. So is there a motion from the members to approve the recommendations for moving forward?
Chair God, this is Reginald Jones. I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, do you want to word it, or?
A motion that what been proposed be approved.
Okay, Scott, do you want anything more specific than that?
Yeah, and if Scott need to reword the motion, I would support that. How would you like it worded, Scott?
Yeah, the 3 decision points are the amount of money to make available for the final solicitation, how we want to target the projects for non-road is our recommendation, and then the third would be the flexibility associated with the funding options, and obviously with the special focus on soliciting interest from Southern Indiana project applicants.
Sounds like.
Do you want them to be, you want them to be separate motions?
No, I think that's fine. If that's what Reggie intended, then I think we're good.
That's what I intended. Yes. That all three of the whole 3 be approved together as one package, the way you presented it.
Okay, do I hear a second to Reggie's motion?
Second.
And is there more committee discussion concerning this? Okay,
Well, Chair Guard, this is Bill Baranik.
yes, Bill.
I didn't quite get the motion in the context of the recommendation language uses the word focus on non-road. And then the as I understood the motion in the three-part, the last part used the word, also used the word focus. Is the intent that the only applications to be considered will be those limited to non-road vehicles? Or is it just that that's the focus? In other words, if I have a trash truck in New Albany, I have 4 trash trucks in New Albany, I want to change them all to electric. Is that something I could apply for under Reggie's motion? Or is that excluded?
That is not IDEM's recommendation. IDEM's recommendation, and thank you, Bill, that's actually a good catch from the standpoint of semantics. It is important to know. The intent of the recommendation is to put an RFP on the street for non-road vehicles and equipment with a special focus placed on obtaining quality applications from Southern Indiana. That's really what we're trying to accomplish here.
Okay, then the clarification would be, I would say instead of focus on non-road, I would say limited to non-road, so that you don't have other people taking their time to apply.
Fair.
Very fair. Very fair.
Now, let me be clear about this, IDEM. Do you not want other people to apply?
It is not about who applies, it's about the projects. So
Okay,
we are going to put an RFP on the street that will be specifically seeking out projects that are non-road vehicles and equipment.
okay,
It would be a
Okay.
statewide solicitation, but we would conduct extra outreach in the southern part of the state to draw more interest from prospective applicants in that region.
okay.
In other words, enhance the competition
Mhm.
among all of the applicants in hopes of being able to award more money to the southern portion of the state and balance out our geographic distribution.
Now, does everyone understand the context of the motion? If you don't, I'll go ahead and call for a vote. All in favor of the motions, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, no opposed. Okay, motion passes.
Thank you, committee. Appreciate the support. Kevin, go ahead and bump us to the next, and Scott will take us home.
Okay,
All right, just before we open the meeting up to the public, I just wanted to provide some insight in terms of what our next steps are. Obviously, today we've gotten the direction in terms of how to move forward with what we expect to be our final solicitation under this program. And then we will put a request for proposals together and hope for that to get posted and distributed and outreach conducted starting later this month. We will then go through the scoring process and develop the other considerations associated with it outside of the scoring, and then bring the committee back together in January in order to go through the applications and the agency scoring and the additional considerations associated with that. And then at that time, we'd be seeking your review and approval on awarding the final money under the program.
Sweet.
Nice.
Good.
okay, sounds good. One comment or question, it's more of a question that I have. I think some of us are interested enough in this that we would like to see, even after we've allocated all of the dollars available, some of us would like to see how these all come to completion, the improvement that it's made in air quality in these areas. And then how what we have done with electric vehicles is fitting into the state's plan, NDOT's plan for charging stations. So, we probably wouldn't have any decisions to make ourselves, but I think we're interested in getting information on what's happening.
Right, yeah, we were having that conversation with Jody earlier. That's definitely something that we envision as well.
Right.
Okay.
When we gather in January, we'll obviously be providing an update on where our utility partners are in developing the DC fast charge network. And Drive Clean Indiana will be able to inform us where they are with education outreach and marketing. But we're still going to be in the infancy stages of that part of the program. We expect charging stations to start becoming operable during calendar year 23. Maybe at the end of 23, we might be able to gather and if nothing else, provide an update on the completion of our projects and what we envision the air quality benefits to be from the investments, and then provide an overview of where the charging network and marketing campaign are at. And if interested, I think that some committee members might have an interest in actually seeing one of the charging stations. Maybe we could have a meeting and a field trip all at the same time.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, thank you for thinking about that, because I think that we have put enough time in on this that we're really interested in how it all works out. Okay, I guess the next item is the public comment. Any people that are out there participating, if you have a comment or a question, now's the time to do it.
Anybody attending in person care to speak? Kevin, anybody online raise their hand?
All I had was this one little question that had come through, but I think that's been pretty much answered through the questions in there. It'll be in the RFP that.
I do have a question. Regarding charging, are any of these charging stations have the ability to charge commercial vehicles? Or is this
Not
yet? Not yet. Okay.
Good, bad, or otherwise, the focus has really been on light duty on the front end, and it really is to a great degree on the heavy side too, so kind of the focus, but yeah. Medium heavy is around the corner, and that's actually one of the conversations that we've been having with Drive Clean Indiana is, how do we transition to that as well? Because there's a lot of conversation and training about it, but how do we get there?
Thank you.
And then tier 4 locomotive question.
That'll be in the RFP.
Okay.
The answer is yes, but it'll be clear in the RFP.
And I do also have a hand raised. Jason Hoffstead.
Yes, Jason here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
What is the, do you guys, for the Volkswagen mitigation funds, what is the minimum for the DC charging? What is the minimum kilowatts those stations will be?
So the way the Volkswagen program and will be is kind of maybe not the right tense, because all of the projects have actually been awarded at this point. But the hardware per the RFP requires no less than 100 kW with no less than 50 per vehicle when it's there. If there's only one vehicle, it needs to get 100. However, most of our Indian Utility Group partners are going over and above that 100. Some are 125, some are over 150.
Okay, because that was my concern, that if they're not getting installed for a couple more years and they're at 50, you're kind of bringing a flip phone to the Oscars,
Right, now it's, the advantage to, working with kind of a consistent group. Having a team focused on this is there's a lot of information sharing. And that's one of the things that we all have come quickly to the same point, and that is that although we had minimum specs within the RFP, those minimum specs are already getting to be a little dated, so there's an intent to go a little beyond that.
And is there gonna be talk between you and NDOT with the NEVI money as far as the units? Because I like that you guys are putting in one unit with 2 chargers, but infrastructure for more, if the NEVI money's there, are those gonna be then the same systems, if you will, as far as the hardware? Because there's a lot of different options out there, especially 2 years from now. How's that gonna be handled?
Well, I mean, I'll speak only from our part and then I'll pass it off to Scott, but I think it's kind of one of those maybe too early to tell scenarios. If you understanding that our primary project partners, the people that are owning, operating, maintaining, indirectly or directly, they're not necessarily doing the O&M, but they are owning the equipment, are the Indiana utilities themselves. If in the NEVI program and if at that same location, it's an IUG partner, then it's probably reasonable to presume it would be similar, if not same, hardware and software. If it's a different site owner than the Indiana Utility Group, it's really hard to say. What would you think, Scott?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. And I think those locations within the VW program that meet the NEVI location and proximity requirements, where say, we have an existing station with 2 ports, we want to add those 2 additional ports to be NEVI compliant. I think to the extent that we can, we would want to add on to hardware and software that's there and not have 2 competing platforms, if you will, right at the same location. But across the entire net, and speaking for NEVI, across the entire network, I think that NDOT's intent and some of this is driven by the federal requirements too, is an emphasis on interoperability.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Okay, so I can respond to Victoria. It appears that Stacy's question is really more related to the NEVI program. And, Scott, you can decide whether this is the venue for that or if you want to handle it in a different way. But I'll go ahead and address Victoria's question. So to be as straight as possible, what types of projects qualify for non-road vehicles and equipment? Generally speaking, and this is a generalization, you're looking at locomotive projects, you're looking at front-end loaders like construction equipment, you're looking at cranes, you're looking at material handlers at ports. You're really looking at things that do most of their work in a very localized environment that don't have odometers, but they have hour meters. I mean, that's a one way to generalize what a non-road vehicle and equipment is as compared to on-road. Hopefully that helps.
No license.
Yep.
Anyone else?
Did you want to address that first question, Scott?
Sure, yeah, I think we got a question through the chat that was more geared toward the NEVI program. So we did go through the timing for phases and our RFP rollout. NDOT will be issuing those. Again, it'll be a phased approach, and I think we're anticipating those first phases of NEVI funded locations being advertised probably mid-2023. But NDOT will be issuing those.
Okay, anything else?
Online? Nope, it appears nothing else online. Anything? in the room?
Okay, okay, well, with that, I certainly appreciate, and I know the rest of the committee does too, the time and effort that you all have put into this. it's very obvious, and this meeting was particularly good. And it's nice for us to see this in the context of one meeting, everything that has been done. It just gives us a better understanding, I think, of the whole program. And I don't know, I haven't looked recently at what a lot of the other states are doing, but I think that certainly Indiana should be proud of the way this has been handled when it comes to completion. So thank you at IDEM for the time and effort that you've put into this. Do other commission members have any closing thoughts? Well, with that, I will ask for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
There's a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
But we are adjourned. And again, thank everyone so much, both people that were on Zoom and people that were there.
Thank you.